Okay, today is lessons 5 and 6. It's again reviewing some of the things that we did in a module when we were doing 6th grade materials. So I'm going to do the odds and then you'll go back and do the evens. On 1 through 5 here, it asks us to use a double number line. Sometimes that looks more like a tape diagram when we draw it out. So on number 1, Tanner collected 360 cans and bottles while fundraising for his baseball team. This was 40% of what Reggie collected. How many cans and bottles did Reggie collect? So to start with, I'm going to draw myself a rectangle. And then I've got Reggie and Tanner. Now, Reggie collected what Tanner did. Tanner was 40% of Reggie's. So Reggie would represent the whole thing. And Tanner's is only 40% of that. So I divide this into 20%. 20, 40, 60, 80. And so what Tanner did was 360, which was the 40%. So that means that this part of it represents 360. So each box is 180. So 180 times 5 tells me what 100% would be, because there's 5 boxes there. So 100% would be 900. So Reggie had 900. Okay. On the next one, number 3. A snowmobile manufacturer claims that its newest model is 15% lighter than last year's model. If this year's model weighs 799 pounds, how much did last year's model weigh? So I draw my rectangle here, and I have last year's and this year's. And so last year's full weight is 100%, and this one is 15% lighter. So it is at 85%. Okay. So it takes up this much space here. So then I have to think to myself, how can I figure out if 85% is 799? How can I figure out what 100% is? And so 5 goes into both 85 and 100. So if I take 85 and I divide it by 5, I get 17. So that means 5% would be 17, or excuse me, to get to 5%, I would divide by 17. I said that backwards. And so I would take the number 799, and I would divide it by 17 also. And so on your calculator, when you divide 799 by 17, you get 47. So each 5% is 47 pounds. 5% times 20 is 100. So 47 times 20 is 940 pounds. So last year's model was 940 pounds. On number 5, the color of paint used to paint a race car includes a mixture of yellows and greens. Scotty wants to lighten the color by increasing the amount of yellow paint by 30%. If the new mixture contains 3 9/10 liters of yellow paint, how many liters of yellow paint did he use in the previous mixture? Draw myself my rectangle here. And I've got the old and the new one. And the new one, it's got more paint to it. It's 3 9/10 liters. And that amount is at 130%. And I need to figure out what 100% is, because last year, I want to know how much yellow was in the 100% mixture last year. We've added 30% to it. So I'm currently at 130%. So I think to myself, 10 goes into both 100 and 130. So I want to know what 10% is. So 10%, so 130 divided by 13 equals 10. So 3 9/10 divided by 13 is 3/10. So 100% times 10, 10% times 10 is 100%. So 3 3/10 times 10 makes it 3 liters. Okay. Now on the next set of problems, it asks us to use some mental math strategies to think through problems. So on number 7, Yoshi is 5% taller today than she was a year ago. Her current height is 168 centimeters. How tall was she 1 year ago? So she's 5% taller than she was last year. So she is 105% is equal to the 168 centimeters that she is now. So I want to know what 100% is. That's my goal. That would be how much she was last year. So I'm going to figure out first what 5% is, because 5% goes into both 105 and into 100. So to get 5%, I'm dividing by 21. 105 divided by 21 gives me the 5. So if I divide 168 by 21, I get 8 centimeters. So if 5% is 8 centimeters, then 100%, 5 times 20 is 100. So 8 times 20, last year she was 160 centimeters. Number 9, an animal shelter houses only cats and dogs. There are 25% more cats than dogs. If there are 40 cats, how many dogs are there, and how many animals are there total? Okay. So 125% equals the amount of cats, which we were told was 40. So there's 25% more cats than dogs. So dogs equals the 100%. Okay, so if I take that, I know that 25 goes into both 125 and into 100. So if I figure out what 25% is, 125 divided by 5 is 25. So 40 divided by 5 is 8. So if I want to know the number of dogs, 100% of the dogs, 25 times 4 is 100. So 8 times 4, there are 32 dogs. Then it asks how many animals are there altogether. 40 plus 32, 72 total animals. Okay, on 11 through 17, it says use an appropriate strategy. So number 11, Robbie owns 15% more movies than Rebecca. Rebecca owns 10% more movies than Joshua. Rebecca owns 220 movies. How many movies do Robbie and Joshua have each? So Rebecca has 220. Josh, in comparison, she owns 10% more than Joshua, so he has 90% of what she has. So I am going to take 90% as a decimal. So that's 9/10, and multiply that times 220, which is how many she has, and I find out that Josh has 200. Then our third person here is Robbie. And Robbie owns 15% more than Rebecca. So he has 100 and 15% of her 220. So that is 1 and 1500ths times 200. And when I multiply those together, 253 is how many he has. Okay, on number 13. The bookstore ordered 3 ring notebooks. They put 75% of the order in the warehouse and sold 80% of the rest the first week of school. There are 25 notebooks left in the store to sell. How many 3 ring notebooks did they originally order? So I'm going to start with what we've got at the store. Okay, so they say at the store they sold 80%. Okay, so there's 20% left at the store. So 20% is left at the store, and 20% equals 25 notebooks. Okay, so 100% at the store, so I'm doing some mental math here. If 20% of them is 25 notebooks, then 100% at the store multiplying by 5, 20 times 5 is 100, so 25 times 5 is 125 notebooks. So they had 125 notebooks at the store. Now, they put 75% in the warehouse and sent 25% to the store. So 25% at store equals 125 notebooks. So they had 100% of that is how many they bought. And so the amount they bought would be 25 times 4 is 100. So 125 times 4 is 500. So they bought 500 notebooks. Number 15. Aiden's mom calculated that in the previous month, their family had used 40% of their monthly income for gasoline. 63% of that gasoline, of the money used on gasoline, went towards the family's SUV. If the SUV used $261.45 worth of gasoline last month, how much money was left over after gasoline expenses? So on that, these are not numbers that 63% doesn't convert easily to 100. So I'm not going to use a mental math strategy. So on this, I would start out, I'm using my formula, quantity equals the percent times the whole. So 261/4500 equals 63% times the whole. So I divide both sides by 63/100. And the whole amount that they spent on gasoline was $415. Okay, so then mom calculated in the previous month they used 40% of their monthly income for gas. So the 415 represents 40% of their total money. So 415 equals 40% as a decimal times their total amount of money for the month. So I divide both sides by 4/10, and their total money for the month, 415 divided by 4/10, so $1,037.50 equals their total money for the month. And it says how much money was left after gasoline expenses. So they start out with $1,037.50 minus the $415 they use for gas. And they have $622.50 left over for other expenses. Hey, number 17. Ted is a supervisor and spends 20% of his typical workday in meetings, and 20% of that meeting time is his daily team meeting. He starts each day at 7:30 a.m. and his daily team meeting is from 8 to 8:20 a.m. When does Ted's typical workday end? So 20% of his meeting time equals 20 minutes, because from 8 to 8:20 is 20 minutes. So 100% of his meeting time is 100 minutes. So he spends 100 minutes of his day in meetings. Now, 20 minutes of his day is meetings. So 20% of day is meetings, and he spends 100 minutes in meetings. So 100% of his workday, 5 times 20 is 100, so 500 minutes. So then I have to convert 500 minutes to hours. So I take that and I divide it by 60. So 500 divided by 60, and I get 8 1/3 hours. So 1/3 of an hour is 20 minutes. So 8 hours, 20 minutes. So I need to add that to the 7:30 for when he starts. So 7:30 plus 8 hours and 20 minutes. It's like 50, so it's less than 60, so we don't have to carry anything over. So 15:50 p.m., that's military time. If you convert it to regular time, subtract the 12 out, and so it is 3:50 p.m. Hi, on the problem set for lessons 5 and 6, using our formula here. So once you set them up, they're very quick to solve. So Micah had 294 songs stored on his phone, which is 70% of the songs that Jorge has stored on his phone. How many songs are stored on Jorge's phone? So 294 equals 70%. I'm just writing my percents as decimals, times the amount that George has, or Jorge. So I divide both sides by 7/10. And Jorge has 420 songs. Number 3, Teresa and Isaiah were comparing the number of pages they read for pleasure over the summer. Teresa read 2,210 pages, which was 85% of the number of pages that Isaiah read. How many pages did Isaiah read? So she read 2,210, which was 85% of the amount that Isaiah read. So I divide both sides by 85. And Isaiah read 2,600 pages. Number 5, the price of a tent was decreased by 15% and sold for $76.49. What was the original price of the tent in dollars? So we're paying, I'm going to go over here where I have a little more room, 76 49/100. That is equal to 85% of the original price for the tent. So divide both sides by 85/100. And in this, you're going to get a longer number, so you just round it off to the nearest cent. And so the original price of the tent is going to be $89.99. And that is an approximation because you did have to round off on that one. Number 7, at Longbridge Middle School, 240 students said they are an only child, which is 40% of the school student enrollment. How many students attend that elementary? So 240 is equal to 48% of the total enrollment. Divide both sides by 48, and the total enrollment is 500 students. Bethany's mother was upset with her because Bethany's text messages from the previous month were 218% of the amount allowed at no extra cost under her phone plan. Her mother had to pay for each text message over the allowance. Bethany had 5,450 text messages last month. How many text messages is she allowed under her plan? So she had 5,450. And that was 218%, so as a decimal, 2 1800ths of the amount allowed. So we divide both sides by 2 1800ths. And we find that she is allowed to have 2,500 texts. Okay. Number 11. 15% of the students in Mr. Riley's social studies classes watch the news every night. Mr. Riley found that 136 of his students do not watch the local news. How many students are in Mr. Riley's social studies classes? So 136 is equal to, now the 15% is how many do, 136 is how many do not. So I use 85% times the total number of students. So I divide by 85/100. And when I do that, I find out that Mr. Riley has 160 students. Number 13, Shelley earned 20% more money in tips waitressing this week than last week. This week, she earned $72 in tips waitressing. How much money did Shelley earn last week in tips? So the $72 is 120%, so as a decimal, 1 2/10, times her earnings from last week. So I divide both sides by 1 2/10. And when I do that, I find out that she earned $60 last week. Number 15. Bella spent 15% of her paycheck at the mall, and 40% of that was spent at the movie theater. Bella spent a total of $13.74 at the movie theater for her movie ticket, popcorn, and soft drink. How much money was in Bella's paycheck? So $13.74 is equal to 40% of what she spent at the mall. So if I divide both sides by 4/10, I find that she spent $34.35 at the mall. But at the mall, that wasn't her entire paycheck. So then I go to the next step on that. $34.35 was 15%. She spent 15% of her paycheck at the mall. So 15% of her paycheck. So I divide both sides by 15/100. And I find that her total paycheck was $229. Okay, now go back and do the evens. And then you can celebrate. This is the last day we're doing double lessons.